Earlier this year, ResPublica approached the CCN to support a project exploring devolution in county areas and the case for reform two-tier governance in England. It's a project we didn't support lightly. Governance reform in counties is, of course, controversial, and ResPublica have a history of backing elected mayors. But ResPublica, credited with helping to deliver devolution to the core cities, are a respected and an influential think tank. Supported by analysis by one of the foremost economic forecasters, Oxford Economics, today ResPublica launched their independent report, 2.0, The Case for Counties. While the case for devolution to shire counties has always been compelling, the process in achieving a new settlement has largely been a fraught one. Firstly, an undue focus on city regions prioritised metropolitan areas to benefit from devolved powers and funding. And in late 2015, when government extended the offer of devolution to those areas outside the major cities, there was a heavy central dictation on preferred models of governance through combined authorities and elected mayors. While some of us flirted with the idea of adopting this model of governance, and indeed Cambridgeshire took the first step to accept an elected mayor, the vast majority of county areas were steadfast in their opposition to this model. It is telling that this requirement was dropped by my government in the lead up to the general election. This concession and the ensuing fallout of combined authority negotiations in two-tier areas demonstrated that an alternative approach is needed. But of equal importance was the renewed debate on local government reorganisation sparked by devolution discussions. With the additional complexity and bureaucracy that comes with combined authorities in two-tier areas, the government's encouragement of bottom-up proposals and the financial pressures facing local government, such a debate was inevitable. Just look at Cambridgeshire, where partners, including the County Council, have recently decided that a review of governance is now needed. CCN has therefore rightly been active in discussion over local government reorganisation. Back in 2006, they supported authorities, including my own Wiltshire, in pursuing our desire for structural change. Their support at that time was invaluable, and while both the county and district councils were all abolished and replaced by a completely new council, we, like other unitary authorities, continue to be members of our network. And a year ago, in the face of renewed debate, CCN published research to support those member councils wishing to pursue reform and provide independent evidence to government on the most efficient and effective and sustainable models of local government. And the evidence is clear. In Wiltshire, we have saved over £120 million since 2010. Duplication and bureaucracy has been reduced, the property estate has been rationalised, services and staff levels have been reviewed and reduced, contracts have been renegotiated. And working closely with the 18 local communities we serve, we have devolved services, facilities and budgets closer to local residents than was ever the case under a two-tier system. The decision for us was the right one, and the only one, given the context of the economic downturn, oncoming austerity, and the rise in demand for our services. In fact, in Wiltshire, all elected councillors and local MPs would agree that the move to unitary Wiltshire has been a huge success. But the real winners of this are our residents, who continue through austerity to receive excellent public services. A decade ago, I was faced with a host of challenges, not too dissimilar to the issues that Paul brought up today. We need to decide how to make local government more effective, more efficient, and more accountable at a time when the funding gap we face is £2.54 billion by 2020-2021. We need to decide where and how to build hundreds of thousands of homes that this country needs, with the correct infrastructure and the economic foundations for a post-Brexit economy. And we need a sustainable social care system to meet the ever-changing needs of our growing elderly population. The answer in my mind continues to be clear, that we need to reform the two-tier government, coupled with ambitious, devolved settlements for all our areas. For those wishing to pursue both devolution and reform today, this report from ResPublica is so important. It shows practical and logical pathways to delivering the powers counties want and need to make a difference during this hugely important period for our nation. As we and several others have shown, it can save a lot of public money. It can bring together disjointed functions such as housing and planning, and most of all, provides the platform to bring better services and more effective decision-making. But it takes the case even further in the context of today, providing a compelling narrative on how reformed governance can be a catalyst to reboot the stalled devolution agenda in county areas, delivering billions in additional growth and public sector savings. Our residents want powers driven down to their communities so they feel closer to decisions. County leaders want to unleash the potential of their shackled authorities. And the country needs local government to step up to the plate and tackle some of the biggest challenges England faces over the next few years. But I do know that unitary isn't for everyone, including some of you in the audience today. And so this report illustrates how reformed and retained two-tier areas can be the driver of real change too. This model, with counties cast into the role of strategic authorities, could bring together existing councils to offer some of the benefits of unitarisation and devolution as a viable alternative to existing models. Most importantly, building on county geographies and the scale offered by the upper tier counties. ResPublica aren't alone in proposing this model. Localis and YIPPA, named but two, have backed the case for counties as strategic authorities. And this report adds yet further weight to those arguments. Importantly, the report highlights the importance of clear direction from central government, something that has been lacking from both the reform and the devolution agendas. This is going to be crucial, as is the recommendation from government to release a menu for devolved powers, depending on the devolution bid and the council structures. A common devolution framework building on the findings of this report is absolutely crucial. And I hope Sajid will update us all on the progress on this later today. Firstly, though, I would like to invite Philip Blond, Director of ResPublica, to give us an outline of the report and its recommendations. I will then invite Martin Hill to say a few words on his experience of devolution and the implications of the proposition put forward by ResPublica. And lastly, before opening the debate to delegates, Martin Tett will give us an overview of his unitary proposals in Buckinghamshire, his experience of the process, and how his proposals could underpin regional growth in county areas. Philip.
Well, thank you very much, and a great pleasure to be here. And a genuine thanks to CCN. It's always difficult working with an umbrella organisation because they always have to balance the interests, quite rightly, of their members. And I think it's to their credit that they wanted us to do an independent report, and we are insistent upon that, and they welcome that because it allows us to say what we really think and would argue for. And I think I would like to begin really by asking, why aren't we where we should be? Because all of you here recognise that something needs to change, that structurally we are not optimal. Now, I wrote the original Devo Mank report with my colleague Mark Moran, and I strongly believed in at-scale devolution, primarily because the centre cannot help and cannot deliver on the goals that the centre sets itself. In things like health, for example, if you have a central determination of need, you cannot account for variations in local need. One area might need something to do with people who are in former working class professions and need specific forms of health. Other areas need mental health. If you have a determination done centrally, you can't provide the bespoke treatment that people need. And this is not just true for health. This is true across a whole range of areas. Now, it's to the benefit of the cities that they were able to work together, particularly in Manchester, before they got their devolution, and created common goals based upon the areas, based upon the pressures that they face. And they're able to do that because they have a city identity. But the county identity persists. The county identity remains real and vibrant. And I think it's imperative that CCN, thank goodness it's formed, thank goodness it's there, drives forward the county identity. Because we need to ask, why on earth has devolution stalled at the city and the city region level? There is no good, compelling reason for it. As our report, I think, makes clear, and your colleagues have also been outlining, you compete the metropolitan cities in terms of GVA, in terms of what you add. You are more prosperous in the sense that you create a surplus that goes into national coffers of £2,100 per head. So why begin, if you like, at the area that's the hardest and at the bottom where you must close? Counties are already in so many ways far more optimal than cities, if they could only be set free to deliver. And I think that'd really be useful in our discussions today to ask ourselves, why aren't counties further ahead? What's holding us back? Now, I don't want to suggest things, but there are some possibilities that occur. The two-tier system, I think, leads to introspection, leads necessarily to a form of conflict, internal, that doesn't allow us to project a united front externally, not just to our own residents, but also to the government. And it's that type of internal fracture that actually stops us getting the optimal for what we need. That then aligns with our own political system, with MPs, for instance, often taking the sides of one area as opposed to a greater area. Everything in our system seems to frustrate at the county level the type of moves that we need to make. So it's imperative that we step back and look at the counties and say, my goodness, what a boon they are. What can we do with this asset that we have to greatly aid our nation and all the various issues that confront it? So I think it's imperative that you keep saying how inefficient, how damaging, and how suboptimal the current scenario is. We even now, even without business rate retention, what shocked me in the report is that local government retains 50% of current business rate growth. Great, but 40% of that goes to the districts and only 10% goes to the counties. And yet it's the counties where the growth areas that can create the conditions for county-wide growth. And with the research that we've done in this report, we've seen the consequences if business rate retention is enacted are even more damaging and iniquitous to councils. We also know from housing that only 30% of two-tier areas are delivering houses against their local plan, as opposed to 60% of unitary counties. The simple fact is if you're together and operating at scale, you can price in or politicise in the externalities that stop you operating together. This has been evidenced by global think tanks like the OECD, where they find out that the more fragmented your governance is, the lower your productivity. 2 times the level of fragmentation leads to a 6% decrease in productivity. So we earnestly have to create a new agenda for county councils. To do one, most importantly, of course, is to actually have at-scale devolution to counties. That, I think, is economically where we are, absolutely the first requirement. As multiple sources of evidence have shown clear, devolution just by itself would give us another 11.7 billion. If just half of that was given back to government in savings and the rest reinvested, the gain would be 26 billion. Now, the most optimal organisation that we can find at the local level is indeed county council unitarisation. The savings from that, conservatively, have been put at 2.9 billion. Now, if just, not a half, but just 100 or 1 billion of that was invested in local growth, that has an even greater multiple, leading to 4.8 billion in increased return of GVA. So, what we have proposed here is, I think, something very simple. First of all, we've created an ask from government. That is, as per the Conservative Manifesto, create a clear and compelling agenda for devolution, for what areas have to reach in order to be devolved and what government wants from those areas such that devolution can take place. And we also call on the government to not just subsist happily in the status quo. We think there are 2 ways to get to roughly the same destination. First of all, recognise that counties are the strategic authority. And we wanted to create a world where it wasn't seen as a zero-sum game, where counties and districts could cooperate, and you create a pathway where both participate in strategic decision-making. We have to recognise, though, that not all areas are capable of that. It's in the nature of human beings, I suspect, to detest or potentially detest those closest to you. You'll know the oft-mentioned remark that happiness is earning slightly more than your brother-in-law. We humans are like that. We compete for status and reward by those closest to us. We don't look backward, we look alongside. That's in our nature, probably has an evolutionary basis, but it no longer serves our purpose. We somehow have to raise our sights, and it's imperative that the government raises its sights and creates an ask and an outline, and recognises that where it's not taking place, it needs to compel. Now, in other areas, of course, we think full unitarisation is there for the taking. And I think what was most remarkable in what Jane, she didn't say, but the arguments that have been made elsewhere in Wiltshire about how actually when you have strategic authorities operating at that county level, you can devolve power closer. You actually can deliver power and subsidiarity, if I can use that word, if it's not too European in a post-Brexit environment, you can actually make real power closer. Because the trouble with our present 2-tier system is districts often lack the power to deliver strategically what people want. People want big choices. Politics is about big choices. And we are not able in the current system to deliver big choices for people. What we propose here will allow us to deliver those big choices for people. And I think the experience we have elsewhere shows that that's what can take place. And indeed, that's what's happening in the cities and the city regions. And my goodness, it needs to happen in the councils. So in short, I don't want to repeat the remarks that colleagues have made earlier. You have the economic evidence. You have the evidence from multiple studies about the gains that are there for us nationally and locally. What we need is we need the counties to operate as they are now beginning to do, and thank goodness for that, with a deep belief in their identity and a deep and abiding recognition that they are the proper strategic authority for their area. And a little notice recommendation that we have under the popular banner of coterminosity, which I hope to see in protest movements in the future, is that actually we need to start realigning public authorities around common sense of places. We need to recapitulate all the multiple things that we have in the NHS, in audit, in LEPs even, I think, need to be reintegrated back into that sense of place. And outside of the major cities, that surely and only can be the counties. So, we really, boiling it down, have two asks. One of government that is unequivocal. Set the agenda, recognise that counties are the strategic delivery authority, and stop vacillating. Recognise that, and you, ladies and gentlemen, should ask that of the Secretary of State when he comes to address you this afternoon. If counties are not the strategic body outside the cities, what on earth is? And I think the Secretary of State will have some sympathy for that argument. I think also that Greg Clark will have some sympathy with that argument. And I think also the Chancellor should recognise that argument, not least from the perspective of productivity. And we open up, and I repeat, two ways to get to this goal. I don't want to, this isn't a war on districts, this isn't an attempt to promote a local centralisation. This is an attempt to promote a public body that works, that shapes, that can deliver. And that surely is what all people desperately and urgently want and need. And we know the composition, we know the industrial strategy. Counties make huge contributions. It's about time they were able to make contributions to their own area at the strategic level that both district and county councillors want. So that is our ask. Make one ask of government, recognise that counties are the only strategic authority. And then we've created two pathways to attain that in a way that we hope is not a zero-sum game. But given Brexit, given the levels of inequality, given the levels of centralised dysfunction that we face, where with the multiplication of central authorities that we have, there's a sense in which nobody's in control. Local government is the, I would argue, the layer of governance in our country that works best, creates the least debt, has delivered the cuts incredibly, as harsh as they've been, over a third. That's almost unthinkable. And I agree with what colleagues have said. I would actually like to localise the National Health Service, not centralise it. It's centralisation that has created this body where nobody is in control, because it's localisation that allows us to adopt to local circumstance and produce a bespoke tailoring, a mass bespoke, not just in terms of health, but in terms of housing, in terms of education, and in terms of everything that matters for our people. So I hope this report has some resonance, because it certainly has some weight. Thank you very much.
Very much, Philip, and thank you so much for the report, because do please read it. It has a lot of evidence and a lot to make us brave to go forward, in my opinion, as local authorities. Martin.
I've got a microphone. I'll stay sitting if that's what the Martins will stay sat. The House Martins, as I've been told. Very much, I mean, my job for you today is to talk, for those of us who are still in two-tier world, just to talk through our experience really, and how if you remained in a two-tier world, how we could actually make it work better. Because I think everybody knows that the system currently is a broken system, is not fit for purpose, and has been around too long. I do very much welcome the report that ResPublica have done, and it's, as Jane has said at the introduction, it's one of many now that have been produced, which all are pointing in the same direction. I say I agree mostly with it. When you read it, you'll see there is a proposal to have, certainly in the two-tier area, a directly elected county council leader is one of the proposals within there. Actually, that's an improvement on a directly elected mayor of a combined authority. In other words, a completely new setup, which actually just overcomplicates the system. But I think at that stage, although I want devolution, I would probably differ with that proposal, but it is certainly something which is worth looking at. As I've said, the system is broken, it doesn't work, and it's not really surprising because it's been around since 1974. And actually that itself was, when you listen to Lord Heseltine, was in itself a compromise. The original intention was never to have districts and counties. There was to be counties based on travel to work, broad travel to work areas, and sort of parish and town councils. And so from the very beginning, it was a sort of a compromise at the last minute, which is, over the years has got worse and worse. And in two-tier world, apart from some of the cities which were taken out, the structure hasn't changed at all. But of course, the world we live in, the world of services, has changed dramatically. Meaning back in 74, councils just directly run things in our silos. We didn't really talk to anybody else, didn't probably talk to the other councils much either, never mind about the health sector and all the other people. We run those services in isolation. Had more freedom back in 74, of course, because government at the time was more trusting, shall we say, of local government. But I think events in the 1980s probably destroyed that trust, which was a great shame for local government, I think. We were running schools directly. If a head teacher wanted to redecorate a room, he or she had to get permission from the county council, which seems bizarre these days, but that's what went on. We had the police committees, so the chief constable had the pleasure of coming to the county council just to report and ask for some money. That was an enjoyable exercise because they actually hated it, but they were part of the county council in theory. And districts, of course, owned all the council housings and ran it directly. How the world has changed now, of course, we think about it, we're now very marginally involved with schools, even if they're county schools. The schools, of course, have their own directly managed by the head teacher and the governors, which I think is a good thing. The police, we now have police authorities. They're totally separate, and various other things have been taken away. But the big thing that came in, of course, was social care, and that was a massive risk for the government of the day. And I think there was some concern that would local government actually be able to manage and run social care effectively. And I think if you compare, looking back, how social care has been run compared to how the health service has been run, I think local government has actually delivered in spades on how it's done that. It's actually now saving money, but at the same time, in general, providing those services to all those people. And unlike the NHS, who actually have had shed loads of money poured into it and still seem to be failing, local government, we've actually had to take savings, at the same time have delivered pretty good social care, I'll say. Considering it's an area of such risk, I think that's something that we can all be proud of. Yes, things have gone wrong from time to time, but in the broad way of things, everything has been fine. And of course, the services have changed, but the whole world in local services is much more complicated, of course. You've got your police authorities, you've got academies, you've got LEPs, you've got the health sector, and various other quangos, the Environment Agency, and all these things, a lot of which was actually run through government or through local government. There's lots of players out there in the field. So it's not surprising now, if you've got a complicated two-tier system, that it's not going to work very well, because it's just getting far too complicated. So in Lincolnshire, we've always been fairly pragmatic, and talk about how in relationships with our district colleagues have been sort of up and down, as I think has been everywhere, often based on personality, but there's normally, it goes well for a bit and then it doesn't go well. But I think the saving grace is if it's really the chips are down and we actually have to do something or try and do something, normally actually we do work together and actually get things done. And I think over the years, that's how it went on. And of course, I think the recent history starts back when David Miliband was actually Secretary of State for Local Government. And then there was a great push about 10 years ago And I think whereas Jane, for example, Wiltshire went unitary, there was a choice given to local government. You can actually apply to go unitary or you can work better. In Lincolnshire, we looked at the problem, and bearing in mind there's always a massive row when you do these things, and we decided to go down the two-tier pathfinder route. We were, I think, one of 5 areas went down the two-tier pathfinder, that's right. A lot of work was put into that, lots of meetings, lots of great hopes, and lots of this, that, and the other. And I have to say, it didn't really produce a tremendous amount because at the end of the day, it was just a bit too difficult to achieve it. We did manage to set up a county-wide procurement service across all the councils, and the same with legal services. I think 6 out of the 8 authorities have a shared legal service, so we all have the same service, so you get the economies of scale and also specialisation as well. And more recently, we've actually successfully applied for business rate pooling, and actually this year, all of the 8 councils in Lincolnshire will be participating about that. And then, of course, that's how it went on. So we coped and we did our best. And then, of course, then came the government's clear commitment to devolution. And I think personally, I think most of us in Lincolnshire would like devolution. I think most people, everybody in this room would like devolution. Because I think we all know that probably local services, as Philip said, most of them, I think we could design them and run them better because we are the ones who live locally. So we applied to be a combined authority. Amongst many, many others, of course. And I think much to everybody else's surprise and our surprise, we actually, while many others fell by the wayside, the Lincolnshire Combined Authority kept chugging on. And in the end, we were, I think, only us and Cambridgeshire were left who were actually still in the frame. And it was quite an interesting exercise because I think the mistake made at that time was the government chose to create these combined authorities, which are actually a local authority. Formally, legally, they are a local authority. So they are actually adding complications to an already complicated field. The mayor thing was obviously what got all the publicity, and I don't think it was popular with anybody. And basically, as we went along, the compromises were made, but the mayor issue was never going to be compromised on. And we kept swallowing hard and thinking, well, in principle, we'll agree with the mayor, and then we shall see how we get on and see if it's worth it, in inverted commas. That's how it proceeded. And I think the other, from a county council perspective, the other problem in two-tier areas is this combined authority, everybody had equal votes. So I sat there as leader of the county council, bigger than everybody else put together. Our budget is far bigger than the rest of them, and I had to sit there with one vote and equal to everybody else. It's not the best way to go forward, but we were prepared to accept that on the basis we would get some devolution from government. And the cry was very much, well, we're not taking stuff away from you, it's all stuff which you're going to get from government. So on that basis, it seemed fairly reasonable. But I think in terms of what really did it for me, apart from the consultation, which we went out to consultation, took it seriously, so every household in the county had a leaflet through the door, and most of the households in North and North Lincolnshire, because obviously there were 2 unitaries up there were involved as well, they had a survey form and replied to it. And actually I do believe in devolution, and we were prepared to accept the result of what the public said. And the public, when they asked to vote, often have quite a lot of sense. And when you explain to them, you said, well, we're going to have this combined authority. And they say, oh, that's good. So when are you going to abolish the county council and the district council? Oh, no, we're going to keep those, and we're going to have them as well. And the comments that came back, and the majority of people said no, he said, well, this is nonsense. You're just adding on top of bureaucracy. So that was an issue. And I think the biggest issue for me was when you actually looked at the small print, it wasn't devolution at all. Because when you looked at the detail of it, the civil servants have got their... Sir Humphrey had got his mitts all over it. And things like, well, you can do this, that, and the other, but you need to get permission from the Secretary of State and the Minister to do all this stuff. Well, that's not devolution. That's not what Eric Pickles described all those years ago. I remember being in a meeting, he said, we want to devolve, and it's going to be one check for an area. So for all your health, or you lot, and local government, health, police, you will get a massive check for your area, and it's up to you working together to deliver those services and decide whether you're going to build a hospital in an area or a new road, and it's entirely up to you. That's a million miles from actually what was being proposed. So in effect, what I think it degenerated into was a sort of a bribe almost. We'll give you some money a bit of money, and it wasn't a huge amount of money in Lincolnshire, as long as you accept a mayor. And I think at the end of the day, the view came back from the public, and I think the view came back certainly from the county council and one district council, that actually we didn't think this was it was worth the price of having an extra local authority in the place, and also, and you weren't actually in reality getting proper devolution. You weren't actually going to be allowed to do things. And interestingly, I was talking to somebody, the mayor of a combined authority, quite recently actually, and he was saying that he is struggling with the skills agenda to actually get control of that. So I think, again, even in those areas which have actually, gone for the mayoral combined authority, there is still this resistance from the centre to let go. And I think until we get away from that, we are always going to struggle, and we are continue to be the most centralised country in the world. So even those who've done that have had a problem. And I think events in Cambridgeshire, we look over the border, I think it would be fair to say that it hasn't been a great start because there are too many players and there's too much confusion. Is it the LEP who's running the economic agenda? Is it the mayor? What about the county council who do all these things? So I think it went down, and looking back, and it was quite, relationships took a dive with most district colleagues because they were very disappointed that we didn't go for the mayor. But I think I have no doubt that we made the right decision in not going for that, and it's better to wait for a proper system, a simple system with proper devolution. And I think I would stand by that precept, by that premise. I think in terms of where we go forward then, and I think this is where this report and other reports are so important. What is important here, and why best thing about this report, it actually shows that county areas effectively, because they have been around a long time, because people understand them, because people have an emotional attachment to them, if you like, they are probably the best area, best places to devolve to, along with cities, of course, because it's not a county versus city. It's cities are obviously the right place to devolve to. Counties are obviously the right place to devolve to. And over the period, ever since I've been involved with local government, there's always been one constant with all this changing, shifting field of differences and trying to achieve things. The one constant always in that, if the county council in our area has to actually make it happen. And then it actually has to be the one who brings it together and the one who makes it through. If the county council didn't do it, it just would not happen. And we try to get partners together. And I think that in itself, in terms, I'm sure you can all say that, and I think you can all sit there as county council people, think of all those things that have happened and just think, well, actually, if the county council wasn't there, would this actually have happened? And I think you'll find the answer is no. So it is right that the counties, the area of counties, are the right way forward. And I think in terms of the two-tier business, which is talked about, that Philip talked about in the report, that if you don't go unitary, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a keen fan of going unitary, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I think it's going to happen someday. But until it happens, we have a duty actually to work positively with our partners. So I think if you are in the two-tier system, and we've got to work out a way how it works better. And I think the honest answer is you don't need a combined authority, in other words, another separate local authority. What you need is the county council to take the lead, effectively, work with those partners, and actually bring it all together and actually have the power to make things happen and stop this nonsense we have with waste and with planning where things basically don't work properly because there isn't anybody locally bringing it together. So I think the government's got to be honest. If we're going to have two-tier, excuse me, let's put somebody in charge of that two-tier area, and that, to be honest, has got to be the county council. And I think colleagues in other sectors would accept that. And also I think that other colleagues in the health sector, in the police, and all those other many players in our local fields, they just want someone to step up to the plate and be given the responsibility to make those decisions and work together to make it happen. So I think this report is a good way forward. If we don't go unitary, there is a way forward, I believe, if the government is prepared to bite the bullet, where we can all run services much better in rural areas for the benefit of our residents, which of course is why we're all here in the first place.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you. I think many of us watched your journey on devolution with interest, and probably now we're watching Buckinghamshire's journey on reorganisation with interest. So it's over to you, Martin.
Thanks very much, Jane. Keep watching, keep watching. Just listening to Martin, it's interesting when you mentioned about Pathfinder, because we've been down that road too, and you know, one of my colleagues in the audience who was there still has the scars. I think we invested something like £2 million into Pathfinder. I mean, and once the heat, what was the interesting thing was, of course, you know, there was the 2007 unitary discussion, and the districts all said, no, you know, let's all work together, you know, we can work this out, we can find all these synergies, save all this money, we don't need to have all this angst, you know, just trust us. And of course, you know, rather probably naively at the time, the then leadership said, yeah, okay, let's do that. And we invested about £2 million, and God knows how long and how many meetings we sat through to get all these synergies and savings. And at the end of it all, we didn't even get the shared legal service. We got nothing, absolutely nothing. Because once the pressure came off from central government, you know, they just found one reason or another just to walk away from the table. So even then, I was involved in the discussions on putting together a joint waste authority. You know, first of all, they all hated the county. So, you know, we were virtually, even though the numbers looked very good in terms of potential savings, you know, there was a great reason then to walk away from the table because it was all about county dominance. So then we're going to have like a 4-district single contract. And then they all fell out amongst themselves. So, you know, they ended up with just 2, but with completely different, one contract, but with 2 completely different collection regimes. So it was just absolutely bizarre. So I've got those scars too. When you asked me to put this together, I was trying to think of something I could really use to demonstrate the journey we've been on. And I thought about a trip down to Clinton's cards. The reason was I was going to look to try and find an anniversary card, because actually it's well over a year since we actually formally submitted our unitary bid. Well over a year. It was back in September. And we were promised at that time a decision by Christmas.
Which Christmas?
You guys were just there before me, weren't you? Absolutely. And we'll come back to that one. So, you know, this has been a long journey we've been on, which, you know, which started, back in really about February of 2016. In fact, you could probably go back to 2007 and Pathfinder and everything else. And in many ways, the catalyst for the journey was not just my own views on this, but the fact that we had one particular district. It goes back to what Martin's been saying about, you know, if you can all work together, maybe things are great. But we had one particular district who, quite frankly, did not want to work with the county and did just about everything they could to disrupt joint working in the county. They passed their own motion to go unitary on their own. They had meetings with Greg Clark in those days to try and get a separate unitary. It was completely destabilising the joint working within the county and just making delivery of just day-to-day working almost impossible. Relations were souring between not just members but officers as well. And that was like a really it was like toothache on a day-to-day basis, and it just wasn't getting any better. But, you know, I stepped back from this because my first engagement in local government was as an incredibly young and good-looking and handsome councillor, fresh from university, back in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was a councillor in Hillingdon, in the days when the Greater London Council was fading into memory. And, you know, as a ward councillor then, we were unitary, effectively, in Hillingdon. I mean, you know, if anyone had a cracked pavement, they came to me. If anyone had a problem with childcare, they came to me. If there was a problem with adult social care, they came to me. So I could address all of those issues. And we did strategic planning, local development control, everything. And to me, that was just the way things were. I couldn't perceive a different world. So when I came out to Buckinghamshire and started to live here about 35 years ago, I was amazed that whatever my problem was, and whoever I spoke to, they invariably said it wasn't them. So I had a parking problem, so I spoke to the district council. Oh, nothing to do with us. I had a fly tipping problem, went to the county council. Oh, no, that particular issue is a district council issue. Why? You know, if there was an issue with, you know, something that had been thrown in the local bin, that's the parish council responsible for the local bin. So, you know, a Coca-Cola tin thrown into the local bin in the village would be the parish council. If I put it in my wheelie, that was the district council. If I took it down to the rubbish dump, that was the county council. Same waste, 3 councils. Why? I just didn't get it. It was just nonsense to me. So I just couldn't relate to the structure of local government as it exists outside the big cities. And you look at the rest of the country, you look at Scotland, you look at Wales, you look at Northern Ireland. They used to have counties and districts, they're all gone. If you go and talk to anybody that works in local government in those devolved regions now, devolved countries, they can't imagine working within a 2 or 3 tier structure. It's completely alien to them. There's almost nobody left there who can remember what it was like to work in that structure. And there's nobody who'd ever dream of recreating it. In fact, when you talk to anybody in the industry, they would never say, well, actually, I really would like to go back to having a 2-tier structure, please. And that, to me, is a really big test. So just some of the big reasons, first of all, for going unitary, besides the obvious ones. You've talked a lot about the strategic reasons. I'm not going to dwell on that too much because you've said it all. There are massive, massive strategic reasons for having reasonably sized strategic authorities that can think bigger than the small locality and can make the right decisions across a wider sense of place. To me, that is just blindingly obvious. Secondly, it's about joining things up. And we often talk about joining up planning and infrastructure. They are the obvious things where you look at the moment, one authority that plans how many houses and where they go, and then throws it over the wall to another authority that doesn't have much money, that has the responsibility for infrastructure. So, I was at a meeting on Friday night, and Bill Chappell was there as well, with some very angry residents in one of our villages here, who were complaining about the fact they have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of houses being built there, but no infrastructure. And they are right to be angry, quite frankly. And it's really, really hard to defend this system. There is just no logic. No one would invent this system today. No one who is sane and outside of a straitjacket would invent this system today. You can't defend that. So it's joined up thinking between housing and infrastructure, certainly. But also, look at the other areas, like health. It is crazy to me that you have the NHS, obviously, but for ourselves, we have responsibility for so much of the health and wellbeing agenda. We normally have the health and wellbeing boards. We have responsibility for public health. We have responsibility for adult social care. But housing, which is a key part, for me, of the health agenda, and you can argue leisure as well, is with the districts. So actually pulling that together and getting really strategic thinking around health is just so difficult. And you could go on those sort of issues. So just joining up that thinking across the piece and across the place is so important to me. And then, of course, everybody majors, and Paul talked earlier about the financial pressures on counties. Everybody in this room is under immense financial pressure. And are there savings to be made from getting rid of a tier of local government? Absolutely, absolutely. They are quite significant value savings, pound notes, that could be spent on frontline services or infrastructure or anything else. And you just can't argue. Why in Buckinghamshire do we need chief executives for five councils? Why do we need HR departments for 5 councils? Why do we need finance departments for 5 councils? Why do we need legal departments for 5 councils, etc., etc.? You just don't. You don't. And there are significant savings to be made by rationalising down the tiers of management. Quite frankly, also rationalising down the number of councillors. There are far too many councillors in most of our areas, and most of them don't have a lot to do. Most of my district councillors spend their time complaining about potholes and pavements. They don't spend their time talking about waste collection from the doorstep. They don't spend their time talking about, the local leisure centre, because those things, by and large, leisure's been outsourced in most areas. Quite often, waste collections have been outsourced. So there's no day-to-day management of those services now. Planning, by and large, now is very circumscribed in terms of development management. So the role for the district councillor is very, very small as a backbench district councillor. So they spend their days on the things the residents complain about. I can't get my kid into the right school. I've got a broken pavement here. I've got a pothole outside my house. They spend all their time basically homework checking what I'm doing. And it's like, why? That doesn't make any sense to me. So that's clearly just a complete waste. So you could get rid of an awful lot of councillors as well. But it's more than that, and I think it was James Jameson from Central Beds who said this to me about a year or so ago. It's actually also the time and resource that it takes, the number of your officers, the constant meetings that you're having to try and work issues through. We were putting together HIF bids, Housing Infrastructure Fund bids, over the summer. We had to workshop everything through. Everything was just like pushing water uphill, because you just have to get consensus, you have to run the workshops, you have to throw resource at these things to build that consensus. The time it takes as well, it means you don't get things done quickly. Everything is really, really slow. It's as slow as the slowest moving district council chief executive who, ums and ahs about whether they're going to sign up to something or not. And that's just really, it just drains the life from you if you're not careful. The third big thing for me is localism. And again, it was touched on earlier. There's this view that's promulgated about, if you go to a county unitary, you lose localism. To me, actually, it's the complete opposite. I was talking to Jocelyn, the mayor of Marlow, last night, who came to our reception, and she was saying, if you go back in time, Marlow, before 1974, was really a very self-contained council. It had enormous assets. It did a lot of stuff here. 1974 took all that away from Marlow. It gave it all to Wycombe District Council, which is seen here in Marlow as being very remote. So they no longer own any assets in Marlow town. What we would like to do in the proposal we put forward is to repatriate those assets back down to the town and parish councils. So actually you've got really strong, empowered parish and town councils delivering good local services to local people with a real sense of place. Because despite what the districts say, by and large, if you live in Buckingham, for example, Aylesbury is another country. It's not their local council, it's another country. And they still resent the fact they're not the county town any longer. So, that goes back to about, 1750. So, these grudges, run deep. So I think there's a real opportunity here to give some real localism back. And I always do what I call the test of the sense of place. If you meet somebody on holiday and you say to them, where do you come from? They'll normally say, Marlow, Amersham, Aylesbury, or maybe Buckinghamshire, Berkshire, Hampshire. I've never come across anybody on holiday who says, I come from Chiltern District Council. Maybe I just need to get out more. And I think for me, one of the last big things is, we were talking about it, a few of us yesterday afternoon, it's about clout as well. When you're sitting down with a government minister, be they DCLG or any other department, or maybe meeting with a third party externally, if you can speak on behalf of a big strategic area and you can deliver what you talk about, you have real gravitas and clout in that room. If every time you're sitting down with that person, you have to say, well, I'm not really sure, because actually I need to go and talk to the chief executive of the local district council about that little bit of what we're talking about. And, well, I'm not sure if they've got, they may be on a different page on the agenda here. Your gravitas and your clout just drains away in that meeting. So the idea of bringing those resources together means that when you are negotiating with third parties or with government, you really do bring something to the table, which is you can deliver. You can deliver. Which at the moment, although many of us think we can deliver, in many ways it is diluted by the current structure. I won't go through the history of our bid because I'll run out of time, but basically this has dragged on for a year and a half. We were promised a decision last Christmas. We then ran into the fact the districts launched a counterbid, which was accepted, which is a bit bizarre because the whole point about one of the minded to decisions is that then there's the opportunity for counterbids. But actually they allowed a counterbid to come in first. They were going to deliver it by February. They were told to bring it in by Christmas. They put something in embryonically before Christmas. They asked until February to work it up and take it through their groups, which was allowed. I mean, to me, they should not have been allowed to do that. We then ran into the PERDA period for the county elections. We then ran into the general election. We then ran into the Grenfell fire issue, which has completely distracted DCLG, and we're now told, well, of course, we've got to take into account the whole housing agenda and how this all now fits in with what's going on. And for me, that's probably one of my biggest concerns, which is I'm well aware that at least one of my district council leaders is going in and promising almost unlimited, mind-boggling amounts of housing, if they're given a unitary as a district. And that to me is a really strong card they're playing and one that worries me. So in terms of lessons learned, just a few simple homilies from me. Jane warned me when we started down this road, be aware relationships will deteriorate no matter how good they are when you start. She was absolutely right. I had very good relationships with 3 council leaders. They have deteriorated. You know, you become enemies. You are seen as the enemy no matter how good you are initially. And you just got to suck it up, quite frankly, put your head down, get through it and get out the other side. There's not much you can do. Secondly, don't necessarily look to central government for the criteria and the process. Rule 1, there are no rules. We have not discovered anybody in DCLG who can tell us what the criteria are or what the process would be or any timeline. They literally make it up as they go along. And that is somewhat frustrating at times. Because of that, third lesson, stay engaged with DCLG. It has amazed us, and my chief executive has made a habit of literally every couple of weeks having a sit-down face-to-face with senior people in DCLG, that during those meetings, new requirements emerge. It's like, she came up to me and said, did you know that they now ask for X? If I hadn't met with this individual, I would never have known they wanted X. They've never asked us for anything. They've never put anything in writing. These things just emerge, you know, like almost osmosis from DCLG. And it's like, they need this by Friday. Well, why the hell didn't they write to us? You know, and literally we had to have a meeting on a Wednesday to get something in for Friday. You know, and it's like, we could have done this weeks ago. But you just find these things out. So stay engaged with DCLG. But not just DCLG. One of the key things that we've certainly become aware of is that this is not just a DCLG decision. This really affects the other departments as well. Because of what we do, it's absolutely about what we do in children's services. So the DFE is important. You know, it's about the way we interact with the NHS. So the Department for Health is important. You know, how we strategically manage transport. So the DFT is important. You've absolutely got to stay engaged with those ministries as well, because they will be consulted by DCLG on any proposed decision. And if it's not going to go in your favour, quite frankly, it's really good that you've got somebody from the DFT saying, whoa, hang on, you can't break that county up. No. You've got to stick together. They are strong lobbyists for you if you manage them well. You've got to manage your own political party. Whatever your party is, I mean, one of the key pressure, certainly going back to 2007, was within the Conservative Party locally. A lot of our branches are run by local district councillors. You get enormous local pressure. You've got to manage your own party locally and sell into them early what you're trying to do and just manage the kick that you will get from your local party branches. Sell to the agents, but also your MPs. For me, one of the massive lessons is the MPs are absolutely crucial. If you have your MPs on side, or at best or at worst neutral, then life is much, much easier. And we've spent a lot of time wooing and managing our MPs because they are consulted by Sajid in terms of, you know, his potential minded to decision. And they can do a lot, particularly in the current Parliament, to sway opinion one way or another. So really crucial. And lastly, timing is everything. If we'd been given a decision last Christmas, I have absolutely no doubt it would have been for a county unitary. If we'd been given it in the spring, I have absolutely no doubt it would have been for a county unitary. If we'd been given it in the summer, I have absolutely no doubt it would be for a county unitary. As we head into winter, I guess my question mark now is this big, massive housing issue. And that switches the spotlight towards the local planning authorities. And they are playing that card very, very strongly with DCLG at the moment. So timing is everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Can I just say that listening to all three members of the panel, for me, it is immoral for local government not to grasp hold of this and deal with it. We are wasting huge amounts of money with the system we've got now that morally now should be into adult care services, into highways, into building houses. And I think now has come the time where we need serious discussions, not only with government, but the LGA about grasping hold of this nettle. Sorry, that's my little bit for the day. Are there any comments or questions just for 5 minutes? Anybody? Yes, the gentleman at the back there.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Cornelius Olivier from Cornwall. The assertion made by the gentleman from Lincolnshire that the NHS was failing in spite of the overwhelming financial generosity of the government, and that somehow local councils should be running health services. Does he think the residents of Lincolnshire have more loyalty to Lincolnshire County Council than they do to the NHS? I'd also query what Mr. Tett said about planning being so circumscribed that it didn't really take a lot of councillors' time anymore. That's not my experience.
Well, I'll answer in many ways the NHS has been successful, but I don't think you have to have much experience of working with them to understand they have got massive pressures. Yes, there's an elderly population. Yes, technology and new ways of working are enabling many people to stay alive much longer. But you don't have to work with them very much to understand that, A, their systems structures are ridiculous, make it very difficult for them to operate effectively. But I just compare comparatively what the NHS has done and the amount of money, huge amounts of money. If you remember 10 years ago, or 12, what was it? No, probably, just over 10 years ago, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, they put all that extra money, I think they put VAT up or something, massive amounts of money went into the NHS. This was going to solve the problem once and for all, and of course in 8 years later, there is no money, and the NHS constantly go back to say, well, go to the door of number 10 or wherever and say, well, give us more money or hospital doors will close. And politically, that's nearly impossible to resist. So you compare how local government has coped with health, its end of the health spectrum, and compare what the NHS has done. I think there is no comparison. I'm not trying to denigrate the NHS, but it is a question, as we found out in local government, that if you have to do something, you have to find those savings, which we've all done. You do it. And actually, I think we can all be very proud. We found, 30% savings or whatever, and all those services out there, the important services, are still running across this country.
Martin, can we bring...
Yeah.
Philip, sorry.
Look, the point to make about the relationship between local authorities and health is that the health service is designed on a 19th century model. It's designed for industrial accidents, for typhoid, for extreme acute situations. And nowhere has it modelled itself for the new illnesses, all of which are chronic. And all of the costs that are coming in to the NHS are chronic, yet they have no means to address these in terms of early intervention. Diabetes is growing exponentially. They have no means to enter into the public realm, change lifestyle, initiate exercise, engage in genuine, which is very difficult, changes in how people eat. Same with mental health. Employment is a health indicator. All of this tells you that all of the real determinants of health are actually only going to be shaped by local authorities. And local authorities, I would argue, are far more important as determinants of health than the NHS. And until we recognise that and start to redesign the system, instead of a system that even on its own terms isn't working. The NHS is 17th out of 23 in the world for deaths by non-communicable diseases. It's in many indices. Once you take inclusion out, which is what pushes the NHS above almost all other health systems because it includes everybody, once you take that factor out and compare those in the system, once they're in, it performs actually pretty badly because it can't change habits, can't change lifestyle, can't change context, can't change environment, can't change economic outcomes, can't challenge violence, can't do any of the things that local authorities can do.
Thank you. There's a lady on the front here, and that's right.
Okay.
None of our four speakers today have mentioned what it's like to have a core city on your doorstep who are constantly trying to expand their boundaries. We try to get on well with them, but I'm afraid that sometimes it's stretched too far. For me, there's only one answer, and that's absolutely that the county councils become unitary authorities. If you try to face both ways, as it seems to be in the ResPublica publication, we're going to fail. I think it's time now to take the tide of the flood and get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, can I? I'm rarely accused of facing both ways, but it's an interesting, it's an interesting criticism, which I'll take as a compliment. Except we clearly don't. I would suggest you reread the report. And what I think we do is we offer two ways to the same end. And in that, I think we're far more likely to be successful. The same end is the recognition of the county as the strategic authority. In our recommendations, we urge the government to recognise that and to, if necessary, compel districts who won't be a part of it to recognise that. We simply offer a way in which they can work together towards that end, which seems to me both civilised and practical. And we also call for the option of full unitarisation to also be there. So we don't face both ways. We simply accept there are two ways to get to the same destination. But thank you.
And a very quick question in the centre. Yeah, somebody? Yes. Very quickly, and I think then I'm probably being told to cut it. Yes.
Roy Perry, leader of Hampshire County Council, where we've had not dissimilar problems to those referred to this morning. Is Wales a model worth looking at? Where the government talks of devolution, I agree totally with Martin. I don't think devolution has been on the agenda for England. But is that a model that we could look at with getting more powers seriously devolved down from central government rather than just concentrating on local government reorganisation with all the controls that come over finance and policies?
That's really well.
We have to ask the political question, which is what I raised earlier, is why on earth are we even asking that question? Why on earth are we even... Why has devolution stalled? What are the forces that are stalling it? Because there is no good reason that I can see that why we're not proceeding at pace for full county level devolution. And a lot of it comes from the concerns of the centre that they fear variation, schooling, DWP. These are the really hard nuts to break and crack. I've argued in numerous publications for local control of all manner of forms of taxation. This is the only way we're going to solve our problems. We simply have to redesign the state, because the state as it currently is not fit for purpose.
Right, anybody else very quickly?
Oh, just two very quick comments. Just in response to Kay, I mean, I've got Cllr on my south, which used to be part of Bucks until 74, trying to grow enormously into southern Buckinghamshire. I've got MK in the north that wants to grow into the north of Buckinghamshire. One thing I say to district colleagues is, you know, if there isn't a county council, quite frankly, you will disappear into those two giant, you know, they're like amoebas growing into the county very fast. So be careful what you wish for there. And just lastly, in terms of the structure, you know, about devolution, I think, quite frankly, we just need to stop playing this game because it's just getting to be such a mess. I think Philip said it earlier. I have never seen such a god-awful mess as successive governments have made of local government in England. When you look at Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, it's clear-cut, very simple, very straightforward. Nobody would go back. We've got counties, we've got districts, we've got LEPs, we've got combined authorities, we've got mayors, you know, of varying sizes from Balkan states up to giant county areas. You know, it is barking mad, and somebody, quite frankly, needs to just stop and get on with something sensible.
And on that note, Martin...